The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in March 1985. David Fletcher held it in his hands, studying the German postmark, the careful handwriting spelling out his address in Surrey. His wife noticed his stillness. "What is it?" He didn't answer immediately. Inside was a single photograph, black and white. Its faded image showing a young woman in a nurse's uniform standing beside a hospital bed. The patient's face was turned away, but David recognized the build, the posture, even lying wounded in 1944. On the back, written in English, it read, "Your father spoke of you often. I never forgot him, Anna Bergman." For 40 years, David had known only fragments of a story about a German nurse who'd saved his father's life when she could have let him die. A story his father had told him once, late at night after too much whiskey and too many memories. A story that ended with a simple truth. "I owe her everything and I never even knew her surname." Now holding this photograph, David Fletcher understood what he had to do. He would find her. But if you're new here, finding stories like this one should be easy. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next. Back to 1944, when a British Lancaster bomber was falling from the sky over northwestern Germany. Flight Sergeant Thomas Fletcher had approximately 30 seconds to live. His bomber had been hit by flak over Bremen, the starboard engines ablaze, the fuselage shredded. The pilot's voice came through the intercom, calm despite everything. "Bail out. Bail out now." Thomas went through the escape hatch at 8,000 feet. The parachute deployed below him. The landscape of enemy territory spread out in the darkness. He'd been trained for this. Evade capture, make for neutral territory, trust no one. But when he hit the ground near Rottenburg, the pain in his left leg told him evasion wasn't an option. The bone had snapped on landing. German soldiers found him within the hour. They weren't cruel, just efficient. A medical orderly gave him morphine. Someone splintered his leg with practiced hands. By dawn, he was being loaded into a truck bound for a Luftwaffe field hospital 30 kilometers east. The facility had been established in a requisitioned school building. 200 beds crammed into classrooms and corridors. Most patients were German airmen and soldiers. A handful were Allied POWs, bomber crews who'd been shot down, fighter pilots who'd run out of fuel or luck. Geneva Convention protocols meant they received medical care, though the quality depended heavily on available resources and individual mercy. Thomas arrived semi-conscious, the morphine wearing off, the leg infection already setting in. A doctor examined him briefly. Compound fracture, severe trauma, early signs of sepsis. The prognosis wasn't optimistic. In a hospital overwhelmed with German casualties, where supplies were stretched thin and staff exhausted, an enemy airman with a life-threatening infection wasn't a priority. But then a nurse took his chart. She was perhaps 25, dark-haired, her uniform bearing the Red Cross insignia of the Deutsches Rotes Kreuz. Her name tag read Anna. She looked at Thomas, then at the chart, then back at Thomas. Something in her expression shifted. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition of a decision that needed making. She spoke to the doctor in rapid German. Thomas caught only fragments. The doctor shook his head. She persisted. Finally, he shrugged and moved on to the next bed. Anna Bergman had just made a choice that would define both their lives. The infection should have killed him. In those autumn weeks of 1944, as the war ground toward its inevitable conclusion and Germany's resources dwindled, antibiotics were scarce. German soldiers received priority. PS received what remained, which was often nothing. But Anna requisitioned sulfur drugs meant for Wehrmacht officers. She changed Thomas' dressings twice daily when regulations called for once. She monitored his fever through the nights when she should have been sleeping. When he became delirious, she cooled him with wet cloths and spoke to him in halting English learned from a grammar book before the war. Years later, Thomas would tell his son that he remembered fragments from those delirious weeks. A voice speaking English with a heavy accent, hands that were gentle despite the pain they sometimes had to inflict, the smell of carbolic soap and blood, and the particular odor of infection fighting against treatment. "I had pneumonia on top of the sepsis," Thomas had said. his voice quiet in the darkness of their Surrey living room. "I should have died. The German doctor told her I wasn't worth the resources, but she kept working every day, every night. I don't know why. Actually, there was a reason, though Thomas never learned it." Anna's younger brother, Friedrich, had been a Luftwaffe pilot. His Messid had been shot down over England in 1942. She'd received a letter from the Red Cross 6 months later, stating that RAF personnel had pulled him from the wreckage, that British doctors had tried to save him, that he died in a hospital in Kent with nurses who spoke to him in German and held his hand at the end. When Anna looked at Thomas Fletcher lying fevered in that hospital bed, she saw her brother. When she fought to save his life, she was repaying a debt to unknown British nurses who'd shown mercy to a German boy dying far from home. Thomas survived. By November, the fever had broken. By December, he was strong enough to be transferred to a proper P camp. Stalag Luft 7A near Moosburg. Anna came to say goodbye the morning he left. He'd learned enough German by then to thank her properly. She'd smiled and said in English, "You have someone waiting for you?" "Yes, wife, children, a son," Thomas had said. "David, he's 4. I've missed his birthday twice now." "Then you must stay alive to see him again," Anna had told him. "That is why I fought for you, so you could go home." They shook hands. It was the last time Thomas Fletcher saw Anna Bergman. Liberation came in April 1945. Thomas was repatriated to England in May. He returned to Surrey to his wife Elizabeth, to his son David, who barely remembered him. He found work as an accountant. He tried to put the war behind him, but some debts are impossible to forget. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Thomas occasionally mentioned trying to find the nurse who'd saved him. He'd written letters to German Red Cross offices, to P veteran organizations, to anyone who might help locate a woman named Anna, who'd worked at a field hospital near Rothenburg in 1944. The responses were polite but unhelpful. Records were incomplete. Personnel had scattered. Germany had been divided. People had moved, changed names, died. Eventually, Thomas stopped searching. He raised his son, went to work, lived his life. But David noticed that on certain nights when the memories were heavy, his father would talk about the war, not about the raids or the fear or the violence, but about the German nurse who'd chosen mercy when she had every reason not to. "I owe her my life," Thomas would say, "and I never even properly thanked her." Thomas Fletcher died in 1982 of a heart attack at age 63. At his funeral, David stood by the graveside and made a private promise. He would find Anna Bergman. He would deliver the thanks his father never could. It took 3 years. 3 years of letters sent to archives and hospitals and veteran organizations across 2 Germanys. 3 years of learning rudimentary German, of navigating bureaucracies designed to protect privacy, of following leads that went nowhere. Then in early 1985, a breakthrough. An archivist in Hanover had cross-referenced records from the Deutsche Rote Cross with personnel files from wartime field hospitals. Schwever's Anna Bergman, formerly assigned to Luftwaffe Hospital Unit 43 near Rothenburg, currently living in the small town of Hildesheim, Lower Saxony, West Germany, David wrote immediately. He explained who he was, who his father had been, what had happened. He enclosed photographs of Thomas from after the war. Thomas with his family. Thomas at work. Thomas living the life Anna's care had made possible. 6 weeks later, the photograph arrived and with it an address. If you're still watching and want the full story without algorithm cuts, check out the membership. Real footage, real history. Links in the description. Anyway, David booked a flight to Hanover. The train from Hanover to Hildesheim took 45 minutes. David spent the journey watching the German countryside roll past, trying to imagine what his father had seen falling from the sky 41 years earlier, trying to imagine the young nurse who'd defied protocols and priorities to save an enemy airman. Anna's address led to a modest apartment building near the town center. David stood outside for several minutes, gathering himself. Then he climbed to the 3rd floor and knocked. The woman who opened the door was in her mid-60s. Her dark hair now streaked with grey, but her eyes were the same ones from the photograph. Direct, assessing, kind, Herr Fletcher," she said in accented English. "You came. I promised my father I would find you," David said. "He never forgot what you did for him." Anna stepped back, gesturing him inside. The apartment was small but comfortable. Photographs lined the walls. Family, friends, a lifetime lived. David noticed one photograph prominently displayed. A young man in Luftwaffe uniform. "My brother," Anna said, following his gaze. "Friedrich. He died over England in 1942. Understanding dawned. That's why you saved my father." "British nurses cared for him at the end," Anna said simply. "They were kind when they didn't have to be." "When your father arrived at our hospital, I saw an opportunity to return that kindness, to complete a circle. They sat, they talked. Anna described the conditions of that autumn 1944, the overwhelming casualties, the shortage of supplies, the doctors who prioritized German soldiers because resources were finite and choices had to be made. She described fighting for Thomas's life, requisitioning medications, staying awake through double shifts to monitor his fever. The senior doctor was angry with me. She said, "He said I was wasting resources on an enemy airman who would probably die anyway, but I couldn't let that happen. Your father reminded me of Friedrich. Young men thrown into a war neither wanted, suffering because of decisions made by old men far from the fighting." David reached into his bag and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside were dozens of photographs documenting Thomas Fletcher's post-war life. His wedding anniversary with Elizabeth, holidays with David and his sister, grandchildren Thomas had lived to meet, professional accomplishments, ordinary moments of an ordinary life made possible by extraordinary mercy. "He lived 40 more years because of you," David said. "He saw his children grow up. He met his grandchildren. He had a good life, Anna, and none of it would have happened without you." Anna's hands trembled as she looked through the photographs. Tears ran down her face. "I often wondered," she said quietly, "after the war. I wondered if he survived the camps, if he made it home. I hoped, but I had no way of knowing. And now to see this," she gestured to the photographs, "to know that my choice mattered, that Friedrich's death meant something. Thank you for showing me this." They spent the afternoon together. Anna showed David letters from other Allied PS she'd treated, men who'd written after the war to thank her, to let her know they'd survived. David shared stories about his father, about the man Thomas had been, about how he'd always spoken of the German nurse with reverence and gratitude. Before David left, Anna gave him something, a small leather journal worn with age. "I kept notes during the war," she explained. "Not officially permitted, but I needed to remember, to bear witness. There's an entry about your father." David opened the journal carefully. The entry was dated 3rd of November 1944, written in German. Anna translated, "The British flight sergeant is improving. Fever down to 38°, wound showing signs of healing. He asked about his son today. David, age 4. He misses his son's birthday. I think he will survive now. I think he will go home to his boy. This is why we do this work. This is why we fight for every life, even enemy lives, because somewhere someone is waiting for them to come home." David's vision blurred through the tears. He said, "My father never knew how much he meant to you. And I never knew how much my choice meant to him," Anna replied. "But now we both know. Now the story is complete. If this story is getting to you, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next one." David returned to Surrey 3 days later, but the connection endured. He and Anna corresponded regularly, letters crossing between England and Germany. She met his family when they visited Germany the following summer. When Anna's health declined in the early 1990s, David flew to Hildesheim to spend time with her. She died in 1993 at age 74, survived by nieces and nephews, by the extended family of her late husband, by a community that remembered her decades of nursing service. David attended her funeral, delivering a eulogy that honored not just her professional achievements, but her personal courage.